Welcome to my podcast. I'm Tim Sullivan. This portion is being recorded in beautiful Atami, Japan. Before we get into the actual podcast, I wanted to preface it with some remarks because if I just simply drop you into this conversation without any background or context, it might be a little bit confusing, at least at first. So, for starters, I named it the Unplanned Podcast because that's exactly what it is. This was originally intended to simply be a Zoom chat among friends. And about 20 minutes into the conversation, we decided that it was so interesting that we would record it, which we did. We later listened to the recording and decided to release it as a podcast. And so that's where we are. So I wanted to briefly introduce Sarai Pahla, my friend, and just talk about her background. I respect her so much. She's a very accomplished woman. She speaks three languages. Her native tongue is English, but she speaks German fluently as well as Japanese. She's in the business of translating medical documents from Japanese into English and or German. And a lot of these documents are, related to cutting edge research being done in Japan in the medical field. So it's a really exciting topic and, something we touched on in today's podcast. If that's not impressive enough, Sarai is a medical doctor. What's more impressive than that, right? She also calls herself an autism superhero. And we actually touched on autism a little bit and how it is, dealing with Japan and other cultures being an autistic person. I found that very interesting. Hope you will too. Long story short, I really look up to Sarai. I find her extremely interesting, and I think you will too. I actually met Sarai on LinkedIn. We connected a few years ago, but we didn't really get to know each other until early last year. Basically, what happened was when the pandemic hit, everybody was in shock. A lot of people were down, scared, myself included. And to sort of give back to the community and cheer people up, including myself, I decided to offer my intercultural communication seminars online for free to anyone in my network who signed up. Sarai was one of the people who signed up. And because it was just two people involved, I decided to go with an informal conversational approach rather than a one-way lecture. And, of course I had slides and I did screen sharing, but it was basically a series of very in-depth conversations. And we had so much fun. We went off on tangents. We swapped stories. We laughed. We just really enjoyed each other's company. And before we knew it, we became unlikely friends. And we joke about it today because, if you think about it in the pre-internet era, it's almost unthinkable that we would have ever crossed paths, much less become friends. So I thank the internet gods and, LinkedIn and everyone else involved for providing the conditions where we could become friends. I feel, again, very, very fortunate. So today's podcast is basically me introducing my friend Sarai to my son Grady, and the result is, again, the podcast you're about to see. I hope you enjoy eavesdropping on our conversation as much as we enjoyed having it. And if you feel kind of like you're being dropped in the middle of a conversation, it's because you are. My apologies for not, recording it from the beginning, but what are you gonna do? Better record most of it than none of it, right? So please enjoy, and I'll see you on the other end.
A friend of mine
That's
said, and this is a really good axiom, and he lived in Japan for 25 years. He said, everything you can say about Japanese culture, you can also say the opposite. And that's so true because everything is so
that's fascinating.
situational here. You could say in this situation, the Japanese tend to be this way. And in this situation, they tend to be very direct, so it's not as cut and dried as people want
Is
to
this
believe.
well? It's interesting because, like, I was thinking. Okay, so Grady, I don't know if your dad told you, but I'm autistic, so I really, I don't understand facial expressions or nuances, or do people have to be direct with me for me to understand what's going on? Which in every culture has created some problems. Although, from what I heard yesterday, I also have a huge advantage because I go into situations and I think, oh, everybody's happy and having a good time, and then I have a good time. Meanwhile, everybody else was actually sour or stressed out, and I had no clue, and I actually sort of elevated the mood. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. It's an interesting side benefit. But the way I said earlier, oh, it would be nice if they could incorporate a little bit of German directness. I guess that's one of the things that makes me comfortable here, is that I know that if I mess up or do something that someone doesn't like, they're going to tell me immediately, and we can clear everything up straight away. And if it was a mistake, I can apologize, and if it wasn't, I can just continue to be belligerent if I want. But I think that is one of the things that I think. I mean, even here, my attitude is I'm coming into a country, or I mean, now I'm settled and I even have my passport and everything. But I'm coming into this country as a foreigner. I want to. I don't want to go in here and like intentionally offend people. And with Japanese culture, my worry is that this is going to be a huge disadvantage for me, that I won't be able to read the room, or that I won't be able to tell that, because I remember this also happened to me when I was in Japan, that I think what the doctors had asked me to do a presentation on my, like, the hospital where I was being trained in South Africa. So I was preparing these like slides. I downloaded stuff from the internet and I was preparing these slides, and for some reason I tried to save it to the computer that I was working on and it didn't save. And so one of the sort of interns or the junior doctors saw that I was struggling and getting frustrated, and he came up to me and he was like, oh, do you need my help? But because I was so stressed, I was like, no, it's fine. Like that kind of like, oh, I'm frantic, and I'm no, it's fine. And I mean, because I distinctly remember this, he went quiet, and I feel like that was the last time he ever spoke to me. And I was like, to me at the time, I was like, what happened? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that bad. And it was only much later. I think it was actually during the talks that I had with your dad, when we were talking about these, about Japanese culture and all that I was like, oh crap. Yeah, I probably screwed that up and didn't even realize. But then he didn't tell me.
We all do. I've seen so many people, myself included. You learn. It's trial and error. You should have seen me when I was 19 years old and I went there. Oh my goodness. I didn't even know how to behave with people in my own country, much less the Japanese. I had a rude awakening for me.
Same. I know that one of the things that I still struggle with today is the idea that, I mean, there are certain expectations of people in African cultures, right? So, I mean, it differs around, I mean, it depends on which African country you come from, but there are certain things that are, I want to say sort of, like I want to say modesty and humility. I'm not good at both of those things. So I'm somewhat of a disadvantage, but there is a certain expectation, like when you bump into people from other African countries or something, when you're in a foreign country, I noticed that those expectations are still sort of there, but it's nowhere near as bad as it is when I go back to, for example, South Africa, because then you're surrounded by a lot of people who do the same thing. Here in Germany, you don't know if the person was born in Germany, if they immigrated here, it's just, you can't tell until you get to know them. Whereas in South Africa, people would assume, oh, you were born here, you should be integrated into the culture, you should know these things.
Yeah.
So that was a bit hard, but I mean, yes, people would joke about it or tease me for it or that kind of thing, but it was never like they would completely shun me. It wasn't that they didn't want to interact with me. And I always remember the interesting thing about finding out later that I was autistic was when I was in school, it was like the people I was at school with always used to refer to me, and I didn't even click until much later. They would always be like, yeah, that's Sarai. We just have to find a way to deal with it. and this kind of willingness to say, okay, well, she's not quite sticking to the rules, but we'll find a way. We've got a space for her in this community. I'm sort of used to that. So coming to cultures where, I mean, because in Germany there's also a similar type of thing that if you socially, if you aren't or if you don't try to conform, there's a certain amount of like, yeah, ostracism, bullying, that kind of thing. Probably not as extreme as in Japan, but yeah. Well, what I wanted to ask was, Grady, so what happens when you go to Japan? Because I mean, you don't, I don't know if I'd be able to tell that you were half Japanese, but I feel like you have some sort of Asian feature, or a hint of Asian features. But do you experience that kind of stuff? Or is it something that do they look at you and go, no connection?
I think they look at me and they see a foreigner. I think like when I talk to people, actually, I've gotten into situations where I would be in Japan and I would order food in Japanese, but they would still respond to me in English, even if they weren't proficient in English, because they just assumed, even after hearing me speak Japanese perfectly, they would just assume that I couldn't actually speak it.
Wow.
And I would have to remind them, be like, I'm half Japanese and I actually speak and understand Japanese. And then they'll be really surprised. They'll be like, wow, your Japanese is so good. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And they'll be like, oh, hafuka. And it just clicks in their head, like, but when I was in New York, everybody assumed I was like part Puerto Rican. Just a geographical thing, I guess.
Well, maybe I'm biased because I know that, I mean, I know your parents, so maybe that's kind of a thing for me. But that's actually kind of cool, because that whole thing of you speak Japanese and they speak English, that's classical. You are a foreigner. You don't know Japanese behavior.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah.
Overall, I'm not expected to follow the same rules as everybody else. Like I often get a pass. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the most time I've been around people was when I would go visit Tokyo. And because I would be with my brother around that time, usually the people that we would be hanging out with all speak both languages. Like he's friends with a lot of like international students who aren't Japanese at all, but just can speak Japanese. He's friends with people who don't speak Japanese at all and have been able to survive in Tokyo for 10 years or something. So I don't know, like there's always going to be a diverse group of people that, that you can find different circles in. So I feel like if you ever get overwhelmed with one circle, you could always probably find a different one, as long as you find yourself comfortable in them. And
it helps if somebody, if you get there and somebody can introduce you to a group, then you're in.
Absolutely.
And you don't have to spend as much time earning your stripes. If a trusted person says, "Oh, here's my friend Sarai," then you're in. That's the beauty of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's good, because these in the last sort of, I want to say in the last 6 months, I became much more conscious of, I mean, it was since we so Tim, since we sat down and discussed all of the cultural aspects of Japan, I've become much more conscious of the fact that or of how important it is to maintain some kind of correspondence with my Japanese colleagues. Because before I used to be like, oh well, once a year is fine, but now I try and make it every couple of months. I just send signs of life, and which is obviously going to be beneficial now that I actually have concrete thoughts of moving there. But that's been something that it's something that I have to work on. I think there's even a reminder on my phone that says it's correspondence. Make time for this. So I think that will be helpful when I am in Japan. What I wasn't expecting was that, so I thought with my, with the Japanese professors at Nippon Ika Daigaku, so I assumed once they heard that I was a translator, I assumed they're going to be like, wow, yes, you've been here, you understand what's going on. Like, we'll definitely let you translate. And I distinctly remember my one professor saying, it's all well and good that you translate and great that you have, I think it was 8 years of experience, but you don't have JLPT1. So until you have JLPT1, don't even expect us to work. I was like,
Grady, I don't think Grady. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not familiar with that. What is
Japanese
JLPT1?
It's a Japanese language proficiency test.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Like,
It-
okay,
it's
okay.
Different levels, and then one is the top level. So,
Like a certification
that
kind of.
certification. I don't have, by the way. I don't even know if they had it back then. But I came back to
How do you
Stone Ages.
how do you get something like that?
Oh, there's a national test where you take on a given day, right? There's a certain
Yes.
designated
Yes.
day, and you go take it, and then
Okay.
they tally it up and let you know how you did on the test. And there's programs, to prepare for it, just like the SAT.
Right.
So Grady and I usually do Facebook, but Sarai's not on Facebook. So
Yes, I left Facebook because
I
it was
don't blame you. It's got,
Good idea.
you just have to know how to control your friends in your group. Just keep the cool people and just cut the others. That's the trick.
Yeah,
oh, what are we gonna say?
no, go ahead.
Because I was gonna say that's not so bad. The problem is I'm very susceptible to arguing with people online. I get roped in. I mean, it's like people, they say things that push my buttons, and I start to argue back, and I can't. I still haven't quite learned to just say, you know what, this is not important. Close, block, whatever, step away. I'm just like, oh, yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
So it's perhaps a maturity issue on my part, but yeah, it was better to just be like, look, let's give people another way to get in contact with me. So that, I mean, for example, on LinkedIn, I actively try and be more professional, and I don't, or I try not to.
I avoid politics and religion. I stay away from it, and I don't like to mix business and that stuff anyway to begin with, but also online, you just can't win. Nobody's gonna.
No. We actually spoke about this.
Tim, you were more logical, and I lost the argument. No one will ever say that.
No one will ever say that.
Why bother?
And also what you told me about the fact that for other people, their idea is, oh, everybody's looking at this argument and seeing that I'm being humiliated. And I was like, I never thought about it that way, because I think that I'm having a one-on-one with this person, and they are thinking of it as, oh, this is happening on a, in a public sphere. I mean,
what was
I can understand why they act like that, though. But
was it Kasparov who said that chess is a violent game because you're humiliating the intellect of your opponent, and nothing's worse than that?
That's interesting. I like that.
I may have, I'm paraphrasing on the quote, but I think it was Kasparov who said that.
I mean, that guy's just good at chess, so whatever.
Yeah. That's another way to look at it.
That guy can beat me at chess, but I'm going to beat him in a breakdancing battle. So, he's not going to look as cool as me to my friends.
Well, that's a really healthy attitude to have. It's like, because if I feel like if people could just understand that mentality of like, okay, this person is good at this thing and I'm good at this thing, and that's totally okay. I feel like the world would be a much better place, because
I agree.
I see people striving to. It's like there's some people who they want to be considered good at everything. Yeah. Very rarely do they ever want to put in the effort to actually become good at anything, but they want other people to think that.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is, I am thankful that there are people who can do shit better than me. Because it's stuff I can't do, or I have no desire to do. So I'm kind of welcome that. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's humbling too, and you're like, oh my God, I'm a dumbass. Look at all these people, all these talented people. The best way to stay humble is to just surround yourself with really talented people. No,
yes,
you don't even have to say a damn thing, and you'll be humble just watching them. And by the way, I wanted to point out I believe, Sarai, that you're a very humble person, but you show it in a different way. Your humility shows in your openness to learning stuff. And when the way we met was when I offered my online seminar, right? And you signed up, right? And I had a great time. I learned a lot, but what struck me was I know how intelligent you are, and yet you were very humble in saying, I didn't know that. Wow, that's so interesting. Oh, and then you would ask really good questions. It takes a big measure of humility to have that attitude,
That's
talking to a goof like me. Well, when you get a chance, maybe explain to Grady the business you're trying to start up. And I don't know if you're still thinking about the space that he's in, but if you are, it might be a good chance to exchange some ideas.
Yes, because at the moment, what I'm trying to do, or not trying to do, what I'm doing is I've had a number of ideas over the years, and then what I discussed with you also came into, because when we talked, there was a heavy sort of technical focus, which is great, right? Because I mean, anything that we can do that will have a technological aspect to it will make the business, will push it more into kind of a more startup space. Like it will be less of a traditional business and more of a, oh, this is innovation and that kind of thing. Especially if we can find someone who has studied computer science and is willing to, be part of the team. But that's, I mean, it's debatable how feasible that is. But what I'm trying to do now is find out what I can start off with here. So have a sort of a core here in Germany, because this is kind of like the sandbox environment, right? So I can test out, I can see, first of all, I'm very rapidly learning. My management skills really need some work.
Mine for sure.
I need to learn how to manage people, deal with people, and also monitor without micromanaging and, not giving too much feedback. Also accepting that people are going to bring their own style into things, because a part of me is like, well, if I can just teach them to do things the way I do things, everything will be great. But that's not how the world works. That's not how the world works. That's not how people want to work. So all of these things for me, starting off in Germany first and, trying things out here, I feel like that's a good opportunity for me, because if I make mistakes, I'm going to make them here where it's less of a risk, so to speak. So that when we come to Japan, I mean, because this is the whole thing. My boyfriend I feel like this has been his goal since he was a child, was to go and live in Japan. And where most people's attitude is, oh, it's because I love anime, it's because I love this and whatever. He says things like, there's a 99 temple tour around Shikoku kind of thing, and he wants to go and do that time. And I'm like, whoa, that's okay. I mean, I've never heard anyone say that. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And he's thinking about things like that rather than, kawaii, So he has a real, like a deep and like a very profound respect and understanding of the culture. And now that he's learned the language, there's even more of that. And so I think he's a little, in the sense of, let's just go to Japan and start a business. I think he's a little bit more idealistic than I am in that sense, even though he has valid reasons for wanting to go. Whereas I'm sort of thinking of it from the perspective of, well, look, if I get things set up here, then at least we have a basis and a backup, and we can test things out, so that when we actually go to Japan and we say, okay, well, we can either start something as a branch office, or we can start with something more innovative, but then we have the business experience that we've learned in an environment that's not a cultural pressure cooker. So that's kind of my approach. And that's, so when it comes to so because we spoke a lot about, managing things remotely, I think that's something that I also kind of need to learn, but that's definitely the idea, is to offer remote services. And we were talking about, because once Grady comes back, we can go into more detail about that. But
Grady here.
I'm here.
oh, are you there? Okay, cool. So the what your dad was telling me was the the sort of the transcription, that kind of thing. That's now, after doing the research that I've done, I see that as something that we could offer as part of a service, right? That we could offer as and say, well, we offer maybe translation if there's an opportunity to do interpretation, but also transcription, but focus this heavily on the medical field and say we want to do this specifically for doctors, medical professionals, and build that bridge between the amazing the amazing level of, I mean, just research and knowledge and everything that is, Japan just has so much. And it's honestly the language, that the language barrier is high, but for the people who manage to get over that language barrier, it's a gold mine. So being able to introduce the rest of the world to Japanese medicine, so to speak, show them how amazing it is there, because I really feel like they're 10 years ahead of the rest of the world. That
So
may sound mean,
interesting.
but
I didn't know that until right now.
know it's insane how much. I mean, because bearing in mind, I translate studies from Japanese and German, and now also from Dutch, and the Japanese papers are always the most interesting and exciting, and the level of depth that they go into, and also the amount of basic research they do in Japan. So basic research is when they, I want to say the stuff that the rest of the world doesn't like to talk about, like animal experiments and stuff, but which we need because nobody wants to give us their babies to test on. So, sadly, we have to test on, you know what I mean? It's a necessary evil of the industry, but Japan does this very well, very systematically, very structured, in a very structured way. They, just a documentary. I mean, I love translating Japanese studies and seeing the effect that it has. I mean, because the ability to be able to let, for example, German pharmaceutical companies, or giving them the opportunity to say, hey, we can get this information for you, we can present it to you in a way that you understand, we can even tell you if it's relevant or not, type of thing. That would be great. The thing that I would like to add to all of this would be bringing in the medical device and so we call it medicinal products here, so medicines, right? But medicine and medical device safety, because this is a big emerging field. So as we all know, the world is aging and we're giving birth to less children. So as my sister likes to say, but you're going to Japan, so you're going to have robots, so it's fine. But the rest of the world isn't planning on building an army of robots. So there are a lot of countries that are trying to preempt this and develop devices and medicines that will support and help people in old age. But as we all know, pharmaceutical companies don't all have the greatest ethics. We just be honest. They're not, when they see profits, they're just like, ooh, so there's this additional aspect for me of being able to support the industry by specifically focusing on, can we make sure that the stuff that we're doing in the field of medicine, or in medical device safety, is actually ethically justifiable? And this, I mean, the ability to be able to be a link to the Japanese either market or Japanese patients or Japanese doctors, that's sort of my core idea.
Interesting.
How we do that is going to be the real question. One of the things that we haven't managed to do. So I'll give a bit of a description of the tools that, or just an overview of the tools that we use. So when I got into the translation industry, the translation software was just taking off. So I don't know if you know what translation software is.
I mean, I can guess, but not exactly.
It's not. I'll give just sort of a brief rundown. I'll also explain it in my way. But these these programs basically take excuse me, hold on. They take a document and turn it into like a database. So it splits up the sentences so that you can have each individual sentence as like a segment or a cell in the database, but it also allows you to create lists of terms or save your terminology, save your previous translation so you can compare. Nowadays, you can integrate it to a machine translation provider so that you can get some sort of basic rough translation, so you can it reduces. I mean, the idea with machine translation is a lot of people think it's supposed to replace translators. That's not the case. It's actually just to make us more productive so we can do more work, because the problem that we have in the world is that we are now producing, I mean, ridiculous amounts of data on a daily basis, even that humans can't cope with it alone.
Can't
So
keep up.
we need a bit of machine help. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And all this kind of thing. So it integrates everything into one platform. And what we were doing up until now was we've been working on with desktop software. So you buy a version of the software, you subscribe, and you get the software, you download it to your machine, and you work on it locally, which for me is, I want to say, to me, the gold standard. Having things locally is great. However, because of the way the technology is moving, now the innovation that companies are introducing is they want to make everything cloud-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem is these programs are very complex and require a lot of background processing. So people have managed to get it so that you can work online and into the stuff online. I personally don't like it as much because you aren't able to leverage terminology as much and old translations as much. And I have translations from I've deleted the translation files as per whatever agreements we have. But if there's non-proprietary, like if I remove the proprietary data from the memories, then I generally keep the sort of the basic data, like just to have the sentence structure and that kind of thing. But obviously I don't want, data from one company to pop up in a translation from another company. That would be terrible. But generally speaking, what people haven't managed to do yet is people haven't managed to create a way for people to be able to do this kind of stuff on their phone, on a tablet. I mean, you can, but it's still not as easy as sitting in front. It's the gold standard for translation, I think, is still very much sitting in front of a PC doing all of this stuff. And I wonder whether it would be possible to find a way to make it so that we could offer people the opportunity to do this stuff more from their phones, as in not have to use a computer so much. Being able to bring that down to a smartphone level, but I don't have the technical skills. I don't have the IT skills for that. And last year I had this very ambitious plan to start learning Python and learning all this machine translation stuff. And I started, and Python, I now know well enough that I can build a little basic program, but I'm not going to be building like these, big projects and doing online stuff. I need to find someone with that skill set to do that. But that's sort of an overview of where the industry itself is going. And I think the value that we add, because I think that nowadays it's not enough to just be a translator. If you are saying I can take words from one language and put it into another. I mean, in the field of, for example, in marketing, yes, that's something, copywriting and that kind of thing. That stuff, the human touch is extremely valuable. I want to say with medicine, it's more about what we were just talking about, the confidentiality that I don't think people mind as much because as medical translators in any kind of sort of scientific field, we have a very stiff type of translation. It's not, there isn't that much focus placed on, does it sound lovely? Is it easy to read? Like, no, is it accurate? And is it accurate? And can we get it fast? That's usually those are usually the things. And so I would almost say this is one of those fields where the focus is more on, it's less on the human aspect and more on the technical aspects of the text. And as a result, I think, or my assumption is, um, there would probably be a high degree of, as long as confidentiality is taken care of, there'd probably be a high degree of acceptance of things like machine translation, assisted translation. But then as the translator, it's important for you to be able to add some kind of additional value. Like, that's why I'm saying, for me, I was thinking medical product safety, this, as I'm speaking to my boyfriend now, the idea of saying, how can we integrate the idea of Japanese culture, and create sort of a cultural bridge in this sort of sense. Yeah, how can we offer Japanese people in foreign countries the opportunity to have, I want to say, have their data handled in a way that they feel is appropriate for them. So it's all sorts of mishmash of thoughts. I'm sorry that I'm sort of offloading on you guys. I need to actually sit down and write
sounds very
all of
interesting.
this down.
No, actually, I have a question for you, Sarai, but
Yeah.
I'll give you an example in my experience. So there came a point where I was fairly well versed in manufacturing, and I would run across a Japanese manual that just didn't explain. There were so many gaps due to ambiguities. It didn't explain a lot of stuff that was necessary to know to understand the whole system. So because I had knowledge, I was able to fill in those gaps that weren't articulated in the original Japanese.
Yes.
And when I think about you translating medical, content, your background as an actual doctor there's gotta be gaps in that as well. And your knowledge can fill in those gaps. And to me, that seems like extremely high value added. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because I've got to say, this was what I assumed at the beginning of my career. Well, maybe not, let's say the beginning. When I kind of got into it, this was also my assumption, was that I would be able to. So for example, the way that I see that in medicine is when Japanese doctors write medical papers, they're very focused on on explaining everything as accurately as possible in as much detail, because there are combinations of kanji that I've never seen anywhere else in any other field than medicine, because they are very and they're not very keen on using things like abbreviations either in Japanese. They're very much like, I want to make it sure that it's as clear and understandable as possible. So that's something that in English would definitely be, I want to say, inappropriate. You can't just take that and directly translate it. You have to add the sort of English flavor of, making the sentences shorter, make it more concise. But the additional aspect, I mean, for me being a doctor, the additional aspect is I can go and read up on other studies in the field and come back to the doctor and say, well, look, this is what's going on in the field. This is what this is what you've done. And obviously I could never be able to do the research on the level that these people research. I don't have this vast amount of knowledge about these very specific fields of medicine. But I can see how that literature has been presented either in the English speaking world or in the German speaking world, if they want to publish in German. And I can go to them and say, well, look, this is kind of this is the tone that people are using. This is the language that they're using in English. Maybe we should adapt it to this language or use certain terms like this so that when people search for your study, it comes up higher in search rankings. The terms are more consistent with what people in the English-speaking world are using, because we do have a big problem that Japanese people develop their own medical English.
Interesting.
And it's not aligned to, it's not necessarily aligned to global medical English, and that's something that I'm really keen on doing this. Where my problem is at the moment is the fact that I don't have direct clients means that I don't have that much say. When I work through agencies, the agency's priority is, I just want you to get what I told you to do done on time, right? Because they're just like, you're just a cog in the chain. There isn't that ability to work with a client and really put in effort to give them what they want and what they are looking for. The translation companies
ask them questions while you're doing it to confirm that you're
the ability to do that. I mean,
as you think you are.
Yeah, getting bright outside the awesome European sunshine that I'm gonna go outside and enjoy is starting to shine in here and make me look dark on the screen. I don't want to look dark. I mean, that sounds so funny because I already am dark, but I don't need to look darker than I already am. but yes. When we ended the final part of the conversation, what I wanted to say was, Tim, your life experience, the number of people that you've been in contact with, the different circles of people that you've been in contact with. I struggle to find people with as diverse a knowledge of the world as you have. What strikes me is when we talk and I talk about social things that I don't understand, you often have I feel like you've always had an explanation. So the knowledge that you have, I feel like anyway, to me, it's much more valuable than just stuff that you can learn out of a book, right? Because I feel like I'm great at learning stuff from books, right? If I have a text, I won't even get bored. I will go through everything. I'll highlight. I'll make my notes. I'll study them. I'll revise. But that's only, I would say, like in life, what you get from books is like maybe 20%. The other 80% comes from doing what you've done, going out there, interacting with people, even in these big like settings where it's like giving lectures, teaching people about other people. Like it's just, I feel so honored that you think that I'm intelligent. I'm sitting here like, but you know so much that I would love to know.
I think Grady would beg to differ with everything you just said, but kids don't look at it the same way. But yeah, well, thank you. It made me feel good to hear you say all those nice things. But another way to say it, I'm just old. I've made all.
Could be. Could be, but
and actually, no, I haven't because I'm still making them. So that's proof I haven't made them all. But trying to make.
I think maybe my dad just often sounds really confident, and so you just kind of take what he says.
It's like, ooh, yes.
Yeah.
You should hear my wife. She's the most confident person in the world.
Yeah, but she is always right.
She is. She's Grady learned.
That's awesome that you can say that about your mother. Like, yeah, I think that's a sign of a good family, right? Because this is, I was gonna say, well, in anyway, in African culture, much like in Japanese culture, we have great respect for people who are older and wiser. So maybe that does come into it, but I don't know. I think I feel like that's a good trait to have, because I'm not going to look up to whatever TikTok influencers and stuff as my source of like inspiration and motivation in life. You know what I mean?
Wow.
That sounds mean, because there are also TikTok influencers who are older and actually know stuff. But,
yeah.
No, absolutely. I think it's a great. Well, it gives me a very high level of insight into Gen Z.
Yeah.
Also Gen Z. So this is one of the things that I also heard was people are trying to figure out how to market things to Gen Z, because they don't know, because everything's about woke, and the people say it in a derogatory way, like there's all this shaming nowadays. If you aren't careful of it, you'll shame someone inadvertently. There's tone policing and all sorts of things. So there's a whole lot of new terms that I feel like me as a millennial, I find it a bit confusing. I try and keep up, but for people in like my mom's generation, Tim, maybe it's the same for you. My mom actually phoned me one day and she was like, can you please explain to me what this non-binary transgender stuff is? Because I keep hearing it and I keep inadvertently offending people. I just want to know how not to offend people. This kind of thing. And what I've realized about Gen Z is they are obsessed with Japanese culture, obsessed. They don't, none of them seem to be interested in wanting to learn Japanese, but they love Japanese culture. And if it was possible to, like nudge companies and say, well, if you guys maybe start to get interested in this kind of stuff, it might help you to sell things to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of which, what I have discovered since moving back here, I've made some Australian friends.
Mhm.
Australia is doing it, man. They're like the number one foreign language studied in high school in Australia is Japanese. They have tons of
Oh,
exchange
wow.
programs. There is this genuine love for Japan in Australia. And I know a lot of very knowledgeable Australians who also speak really, really good Japanese.
Jeez.
So it's interesting. And I noticed that even I thought Grady, your generation, when you were in high school, I was amazed at the interest people had in Japanese culture. And my wife at the time was teaching Japanese there. How many people? She had like 22
Oh
people.
yeah, in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
in
In
Hawaii.
Hawaii,
Yeah,
that has something to do with it. That is something.
that was, I mean, in particular, like obviously because it's in between America and Japan, but like definitely even in the mainland here, like Sarai said, like earlier, a lot of people say that they want to go to Japan because anime. And
Mm.
like, yes, anime is a cultural aspect of Japan. It absolutely is undeniably, but it is not the only one. And I think a lot of people, watch anime and they see the things in the animes and they're like, this is the kind of Japan that I want to experience without realizing that it's still a cartoon.
Yes,
know?
it's made up.
There's
It's
more
made
to
up.
it. Yes, there's way more to it.
Uh,
So, but I support it. I want people to go to Japan and check it out and see for themselves
Mm.
and enjoy it because I think it has a lot to offer besides anime.
yeah.
I love anime. Don't get me wrong. I love anime.
That's same. I mean, now that I want to say now that I'm a grown up who has her own business or at least freelance business, I don't have as much time to indulge in it as I would like
Yeah.
to.
Mhm.
But I think just the general fascination that people have, I think that's something that should be tapped into. Obviously, the problem is that I'm going to say in Europe we have this issue that people they're still very Eurocentric. So there's almost this attitude of how to say this sensitively, right? Because it's not I don't want to criticize people's attitude, but so for example in Germany we have this. I was actually laughing about this yesterday with my boyfriend and his flatmate. So in Germany there are some people who have an issue with migrants, as in immigrants coming to the country, because they're like, oh, but now every now and again I have to see someone with a different skin color to mine, and that feels weird. I just want to be surrounded by people who look like me and speak the same language as me. And okay, I mean, kind of then stay in the countryside, like if you want to do that, then
Yeah,
go,
right.
like I don't want to be like, no, you shouldn't do that or you shouldn't think like that. Well, if you want to do that, but have a little house, build a little wall around it, and then you won't see anyone. And you can
Yeah, exactly, right?
like, but otherwise, I think different cultures enrich each other. That's my attitude.
Yeah.
I
agree.
And getting people to see, I mean, especially here in Germany, being able to show people the value that an understanding of Japanese culture would offer them, and even if it's just a superficial understanding, as long as they're respectful about it and they don't have, I want to say what kind of irritates me. They say, "Oh, we're gonna make this Japanese," and then they get I'm just gonna say Caucasian. Don't know if that could be racist according to Gen Z, but they get
No,
Caucasian.
it's not.
people.
It's not.
I'm glad. I'm glad. They'll get a Caucasian person to dress up as a geisha, and that for them is we've hit the jackpot here. That shows that we understand Japanese culture. And you're like, no, have Caucasian people in kimonos and be like, yeah, see, we love Japan. Like, no. Please don't just think that that's all it takes to understand a country, a culture that has been going for centuries, millennia. You know that you can't. That's not how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, there so, as Grady said earlier, there's so much to Japan. I mean, there are so many sides to Japan. It's impossible to encapsulate it. You know, yeah, there's geisha, but that's really, you never see geisha. I mean, that's like a rarity.
Yeah, that's the.
You know
But
what
that's
I'm
what, like, yeah, that's what they're all obsessed about. It's like that, and like, you know, samurai and katanas.
saying?
You
Yeah.
know,
Yes.
there's so many people out here that just swear that they want to experience Japanese culture, and then they go buy a sword from online, and then they swing it
Yes.
around in their kimono, and they teach sword swinging classes, and they talk about how much they love Japan.
Maybe that's where we should end this. That's a good.
Yes, I don't think I can even talk. I'm laughing too much. That's such an accurate description.
It's too real.
Okay.
Schedule another powwow in the future.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, let's do it
Yeah,
soon.
that'd be
Enjoy it.
great. I had so much fun. Yeah.
Me too.
I think we could turn this into a podcast. I have someone else I want to bring on.
But yeah, let's build a little bit more on this.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Great
And
stuff.
Sarai, let us know when you're when you want to do another one. And we'll this is a good time for everyone, right? Sunday at this time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect.
This is good.
Perfect.
All right, man. See you
Cool.
guys. I'm glad I got to introduce you to.
Yeah, nice
Yeah,
to meet you,
awesome.
Sarai.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too, Grady. Cool. And have a good weekend. Well, end of the weekend, I guess.
Yes, thank you.